Several months ago, I made a big video discussing all the turf wars in Monster Hunter. Before Wilds comes out and invalidates it, I thought it would be fun to rank all of them in a tier list. I've never really done anything like this before, but I think it will be a lot of fun, and I'm curious to see how others agree or disagree. I'll be dividing it from S to F tier. We'll start with World and end with Sunbreak. Anjanath vs the Great Jagras. This is a solid turf war, very violent. It's funny how Jagras gets shaken about and dragged everywhere, he can't even fight back, it's super one-sided. I like how Anjanath can also do it to rise monsters, although it does get weird with Tetranodon since he's so big. I think I'll put this one in C tier. Next we have Anjanath vs Toby Kadachi. This is a good turf war. I like how Toby's shock spikes are used for defense and Anjanath gets briefly knocked away, but then Toby does this really feeble attempt to knock him over before getting the Jagras treatment. I'm going to put him under Jagras just because I enjoy the violence of that turf war a bit more. Next we have Rathalos vs Anjanath. While I like Anjanath getting humbled, seeing as he was able to easily take down the other two, this turf war is over almost ridiculously fast, and it doesn't look as good when outside of the ancient forest, like in Rise. It's a fine enough turf war, but it's not as good as the Toby fight, nor is it as brutal and funny to watch as the Jagras battle, so it will go in C tier but below the others. Next we have Baroth vs Gyrotodus. This is a fun turf war. I enjoy how Gyrotodus swims underneath and ambushes Baroth from below, before trying to squeeze him to death like a boa constrictor. Baroth doesn't get to do a whole lot though, which is a bit disappointing. I think I'll also put this one in C tier. Diablos vs Baroth is straight to the point. 2 charges, 1 stands, 1 falls. I love the simplicity, since charging is what these two do. I like it better than Anjanath vs Rathalos, but probably not the others. Diablos vs Rathion on the other hand, that would be B tier in my opinion. Similar to the Gyrotodus turf war, the ambush aspect is great, but I especially love how Diablos goes fully for the kill, and would have succeeded if Rathion didn't move out of the way. It's really good. Diablos vs Diablos has an interesting history of being a thing in cutscenes in so many games, and now it's finally a gameplay thing. A monumental achievement. I do kind of wish a horn got broken, but it's still pretty solid. I'd put it in B tier below Rathion. Now we start moving on to the Coral Highlands turf wars, Legiana vs Paolumu. Individually they both have some very good turf wars, and together the fight is great. I think it's the first time we've witnessed 2 flyers go against each other. I like how Paolumu briefly holds Legiana back with wind blasts. I would put this... I kind of want to put this in A, but I feel like... Let's put it in A for now, yeah. Another monster with good turf wars is Odogaron. I particularly enjoy his Radaban battle because of how good the animation is. Odogaron smoothly dodging all of Radaban's strikes before jumping on him and ripping chunks off. I'll put this in high B. No, I'll put this in A. A tier is better I think, but I don't know if it's better than Legiana vs Paolumu. Odogaron vs Tsiaku is a very simple turf war, but that kind of adds to the comedy aspect. It's just Titsi flashes him and then it's over. This isn't something I found out until later, but it actually ties in with Odogaron's ecology. His eyes are shielded, and he basically can't see a whole lot, both due to the limited light of the Rotten Veil, but also to protect him from the effluvium. As such, Titsi's greatest weapon can't hurt him. I'll put the fight in low B, because while it's simple, I really like how the ecology plays into it. Odogaron vs Paolumu is fundamentally very similar to the Radaban one, but this time it ends with Odogaron shaking Paolumu around like a chew toy. It's wonderfully animated. I think this one goes in A tier personally. Valhazark vs Odogaron is our very first Elder Dragon turf war. This one is very good, because Odogaron tries his usual shtick of jumping on his opponent and trying to bite them, and Valhazark just waits, and the effluvium does its job and completely knocks Odogaron out. Another simple turf war, but one that makes use of the monster's own unique abilities and ecology. I am going to put this one at high B. It beats the Tsiaku turf war, but I like how acrobatic the other ones are. Kushala vs Teostra. I'm not sure how controversial this one will be, but I would like to place this turf war in E tier, which is E for eh. It's just that for 2 dragons with so many different abilities, nothing really happens here. They just fly around each other and barely make contact. I'm not exactly asking for like a fire tornado, but I would expect a little bit more. Nargacuga vs Teostra. Now this one is sick. I remember it actually being teased in the trailer that revealed Teostra for World. The 2 dragons wrestle with each other before Nargacuga overpowers Teostra. It's really well done. Let's put it in A tier. Then we have Nargacuga vs Kushala. This one I don't like as much for reasons we'll largely get into later, but essentially I think it's out of character for Kushala to just rush at Nargacuga like that. But on the other hand, I kind of really like how Nargacuga just tosses him across the arena. For that, it will be in C tier. Maybe Above the Rathalos vs Anjanath, but I'm not sure about the others. Now we move on to Deviljho. Deviljho vs Diablos is A tier. I love Deviljho grabbing him between the horns and then just raising him up into the air and smashing him down. It's quite amusing because Diablos' horns and sheer strength have proven to be his greatest assets, but Deviljho is stronger and simply found a way around them. Then we have Deviljho vs Rathalos. That one's a C tier, I think. It's a good turf war, but nothing really special. I do like how Deviljho tries to use a range attack, before just resorting to grabbing Rathalos out of the sky. Then we have Deviljho vs Basilgeuse, I don't know how you say it. I'm torn between A or B on this one. This is Basil's only turf war in World, and it's a battle between two invaders. And it does start a really interesting theme with Basilgeuse, where it's clear he's not a very adept fighter, but his bombs carry him through many situations. I think I'll put this one in high B, just because I like all the A tier turf wars better. Now this one is not technically a turf war, but I want to include it anyway as a prominent monster vs monster interaction. Deviljho being able to carry monsters around, casually, is one of the funniest things they've ever done, and you can really appreciate why he had to be a post-launch update. The fact that it can happen to monsters in all regions, including Odogaron, is amazing. You have this vicious fanged wyvern, who takes on anyone and anything, but he just gets so badly humbled, and the fact that Deviljho can fight while using them too is the cherry on top. Let's put this at S tier. We can rearrange them later, but I do think this belongs very high. Recently, I partnered with Fanatical, an online retailer that sells PC game keys. They're very reputable, and I've actually bought many games from them in the past, including the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection, Persona 5 Royal, every single old Star Wars game. It's great. They sell a lot of new and old games for Steam and other PC storefronts here, and often have some very good discounts. Recently, they've been running a build your own bundle deal for the current Monster Hunter games, expansions, and deluxe kits. They normally retail right now for up to £35, but by bundling them together, you can get some nice discounts. For example, World and Iceborne together would normally be £60, but with this bundle, you can get them for £10. Rise and Sunbreak together would add up to almost £66, but together, they're only £10. Getting World, Rise, Iceborne and Sunbreak adds up to £18, and if you feel like adding the deluxe kits on top, it maxes out at $24.99, the default price of Monster Hunter World. It's a pretty good deal, you get basically everything and save like £100. But if you want, you can just pick out a single game and expansion and still save a lot. World and Rise run really well on PC and are Steam Deck verified. These are good versions of the games and what I personally use to record all my footage. Fanatical are also doing a pre-order discount of 18% on Monster Hunter Wilds, and what's cool is that it knocks off around £10, which for me brings it from £60 down to $50, so you're not paying next gen prices for this, which is nice. If you want to check both the bundle and the Wilds pre-order out, be sure to click the links in the description. Our first Iceborne turf war, Barioth vs Bambaro. This is a decent turf war, but it's nothing special. It gets points for being one of the few truly unique Iceborne turf wars, but there's not really anything notable here, aside from Barioth just chucking Bambaro across the arena at the end. I'll put it in C tier. Brachydios vs Rathalos is semi-recycled from Deviljho vs Rathalos, in that Rathalos' animations were almost completely recycled, but Brachydios is custom animated to use his own abilities. I like that. The fight isn't anything amazing, but it works for both of them, so it can go in C tier. Ruin and Nergigante vs Savage Deviljho, S tier. Absolutely brutal, seeing Deviljho's savage strength lift and drag Nergigante around before he lifts his fist and punches the Brute Wyvern down. Some might dock points because it gets recycled for Rajang, but the turf war animation is still in character for him too. I just love seeing these giant titans wrestle around. For Glavenus vs Rathalos, it's a similar deal to Brachydios vs Rathalos. Same war, but Glavenus animations and Rathalos loses. Decent, nothing special, but C tier. I think it's one of the only turf wars where Glavenus gets to use a sword tail, which is notable, so I'll bump it up a bit for that. Next we have what I like to call Brute vs Pseudo, which is Brachydios, Fulgur Anjanath and Glavenus vs Tigrex, Barioth and Nargacuga. This one is boring. None of the fighters use their unique abilities, they all use attacks that really any monster could use. You know, Nargacuga doesn't get to use the blade wings or his tail, Barioth doesn't get to use a blizzard. I guess it works for Tigrex, but I don't know, it's just... I want to put this in E tier. Now we have Odogaron vs Glavenus or Brachydios. I like this one a bit better, although it has similar problems. Glavenus and Brachydios act a little bit out of character, but Odogaron still gets to do his thing. It's maybe better or worse than Nergigante vs Kushala. Now we have Odogaron vs Tigrex, Nargacuga and Barioth, which is a similar deal to the previous turf war, but I'll rate this one better, because the pseudo-wyverns don't feel particularly out of character here. It's still a fun turf war to watch, so it will go in C tier, bordering B. Odogaron vs Legiana. Odogaron also fights Rathalos with these animations, but it's still a really fun turf war to watch, a fun back and forth, with Odogaron even able to jump upon his flying opponents. High B tier, on par with Odogaron's other turf wars. Nargacuga vs Rathalos, C tier. It's intended to be used for all three pseudos and Rath/Legiana, and so it's kind of vague in terms of monster abilities, but it's still well animated and fun to watch, so it won't go in E tier or D. I'm not a fan of Zinogre's turf wars in Iceborne. You can really tell that he was a late addition to the game, because all of his turf wars feel kind of the same. Brachydios physically biting him rather than punching is weird, and the reason he does it is because the turf war is also supposed to be reused for Folga and Janath. It's okay, D tier. Zinogre vs Rathalos. This one feels very similar to the pseudo-wyvern turf war, to the point I feel it was almost semi-recycled. But I'll put this one a bit higher though, because both combatants get to at least do their thing. It's better but not by much, C tier. Then we have Diablos vs Glavenus or Folga and Janath. This is a really neat fight. Of course it has the problem of Glavenus not really getting to use his tail, but grabbing Diablos by the neck and then suddenly getting lifted and tossed to the side is really cool, especially because of how big he is. I'll put this one in B tier. Back in the day, Monster Hunter games used to have these opening CGI cutscenes that would show off the game's setting, monsters, new concepts as a representation of what the game would be like, to hype you up. World was the first game to not have this, and Rise doesn't have them either. Some people have wondered why they stopped, and Rajang vs Kirin makes that pretty apparent, because the turf war is identical to their interaction in Rajang's intro cutscene, where Rajang violently rips off his horn and eats it. It's a cool interaction, and a sign of how far we've come. We don't really need those CGI cutscenes anymore, because all of it is just possible in-game. That aside, it's a really cool turf war, and it actually plays out differently if Kirin's horn is already broken. I would say A tier. Savage Joe vs Velkhana is not really a Velkhana turf war, because it also happens for Namiel and Black Veil Valhazak, but it is a laser battle, which is cool. Rajang vs Velkhana is our first F tier. It's heavily recycled from Nargacuga vs Kushala, a turf war I'm not really a fan of. I believe Velkhana is acting out of character here by just feebly rushing towards Rajang, and I find it really pathetic how she just gets slammed to the ground and then kind of feebly kicks Rajang away. It looks bad. No thank you. We also have Ruina vs Velkhana, which has the same problems, except Velkhana kind of blasts him away. It was silly of Kushala to rush him, and in my opinion, it's even sillier of Velkhana. F tier again. Same way Nargacuga's fights with Kushala was given to Rajang and Velkhana, his fight with Teostra was also recycled for Rajang, but this one is pretty cool because halfway through, Teostra starts blasting him with fire. It's enough to put the turf war right next to the original. Then we have Ruina Nargacuga vs Rajang. It's a great turf war, strength vs strength. Rajang Shoryukening Nargacuga and getting smacked in response is really fun. I say put it in A tier. Velkhana vs Kushala Daora. It's mostly the same as Teostra vs Kushala, but at the end, Velkhana fires a laser. It's E tier. Rajang vs Rathalos or other flying wyverns is really fun. He basically does something of a Sadong Bowser and just grabs them by the tail and swings them. It's great. Rajang being one of the only monsters to have actual thumbs means he's the only one who can really do this. I would put this in A tier personally. Now for our first Rise turf war, Almudron vs Bishaten. I'm really fond of this one. Leviathans are really unique creatures, with a very different body style that allows them to do a lot more. The highlight of this turf war is probably Almudron grabbing Bishaten and pulling him into the ground, but then anticipating that he'll break free and then catching him mid-air. I think this is a high B that borders on A. Then we have Somnacant vs Agnosom. Out of all the new turf wars in Rise, this one's probably the worst, but that's not a bad thing. They're using very basic attacks against each other, but it's still very unique. And I like how when Agnosom backflips Somnacant, she strikes back really hard and then puts him to sleep. I think this one goes in C tier. Tetranodon vs Azores was one of the first Rise turf wars shown off. It's a sumo wrestling match, but the highlight is Tetranodon stuffing Azores into his mouth. I love how casually deliberate the movement is too. He just calmly lifts him up and just stuffs him in there. I almost feel like this is an A tier, but it borders on B. I'll revisit it later. Then we have you know what, no, we'll leave that in B, because Gosharag vs Tetranodon is in A, is one of those turf wars that kind of puts a spin on a previous one, because Gosharag is basically a giant Azores, and him and Tetranodon initially bump against each other in the same way too, but this time Goss is having none of it, and right hooks him and gives chase. The punching animation while he's on top is really fluid too, and I love how Tetranodon scrambles away. It's a beautiful animation and it's fun to watch, so A tier. Zinogre vs Mizitsune is a wonderfully animated turf war. It makes use of Zinogre's strength and acrobatics, but also Mizitsune's graceful slipperiness. Lots of good back and forth here. This is an A tier as well. Okay, Magnamalo vs Rathalos, or Barioth, or Agnesom, or who Basilgoose. This is S tier. I don't care that it gets reused. I think people forget how cool this one is, especially when you break it down. Like how Magnamalo gets thrown off and has to boost back up, and then tries to fall on them, but then they dodge. So then he boosts up one more time, takes hold, punches them in the face before flipping away and dive bombing them both at you. That's insane, I'm sorry. It's the first turf war to actually target you, us. It shows so much about Magnamalo's character. It belongs in S tier, it's glorious. Magnamalo vs Teostra is functionally the same turf war. This one goes straight into F tier. Why? Because Teostra is actually supposed to win this turf war, based on the Wyvern Ride outcome. But the animation is mostly identical, except at the end where Teostra or Kushala blasts flames or wind after they hit the ground. It's just a bit lazy. I'm not a fan. Now for the Sunbreak turf wars. Rajang vs Basilgoose is good. It's a bit like Gosharag vs Tetranodon, where it's a twist on a previous turf war, which would be Rajang vs Rathalos. Only when Rajang swings Basil a second time, the bombs drop, which allows him to break free and dive bomb Rajang. It's quite a funny twist, although I can't lie, the animation does look a bit abrupt, but it's still really cool. Astalos vs Mizitsune is A tier. Similar DNA to the Zinogre fight, lots of acrobatics. It's fun because Mizitsune snags him with a laser, which brings him down, dives towards him, but then Astalos is able to dodge and counter as they tumble over each other. It's really fun to watch. In case you haven't realised, based on my high praise of Odogaron, I really like monster acrobatics. Anyway, Kushala vs Espinas. This is Kushala's first turf war to make use of his unique abilities. It ties into old frontier lore, and both monsters get to do their thing. It's high B. Neither of them really come across as weak here, and they both play to their strengths. Lunagaron vs Garon Gorm feels like a Monster Hunter World turf war, and I mean that in a good way. Both monsters go at it, Lunagaron using his agility, while Garon Gorm uses his strength. And I like how Garon Gorm has him pinned down before Lunagaron finally decides to lock in and engages ice mode with a backflip. I kind of forgot how good this turf war is. B tier. Gormagala vs Seregios is a disappointment. It feels like an Iceborne turf war, and I mean that in a bad way. They move so slowly. I mean, at least they use some of their own abilities, but I don't know, it just doesn't really impress me. I feel like the 4 ultimate flagships deserve better. E tier. Lunagaron vs Zinogre on the other hand is A tier. It's such a well structured turf war. The two wolves size each other up, leap at each other, and then they like simultaneously power up. It's so good, and then they wrestle. Zinogre and Rise got some really good turf wars in general. Then we have Lunagaron vs Malzeno. This one is high B. I think it's cool how Lunagaron is fast enough to quickly get the drop on Malzeno, and I also love how Malzeno's tail ends up getting him. I've been a long time critic of how Malzeno's claw tail never really factors into his attacks, so it's cool to see it in action, and I find that stance as he's in the sky really cool. Malzeno vs Scorned Magnamalo. Pre-title updates, I would have said that this was the best turf war of all time. Every aspect is just amazing. It's a bit like Magnamalo vs Rathalos, where you have to break it down to truly appreciate it. First of all, Malzeno's battle stance, that looks really cool, and the way he effortlessly dodges Magnamalo. Both of them using their blade arms to strike each other, and then immediately using their tails, and I like how, as they clash for the second time, they both kind of yell at each other. And then Malzeno tries to topple Magnamalo before getting pushed off, and then of course Magnamalo charges at him and withstands the laser. It's just so cool. And the fact that they use attacks against each other that they would use against us makes it even better. Easy S tier. Of course, it gets topped by Malzeno vs Velkhana. This is the best turf war in the entire series right now. And I think what I love the most is how both dragons get to use all their unique abilities. Like, it starts off with Velkhana powering up, but then Malzeno takes advantage of that and rushes towards her. And as they sort of flip around, Velkhana almost gets Malzeno in the neck. It happens really fast and you almost miss it, but Malzeno barely moves his head to the side and then he counterattacks. And then I love how Malzeno brings up the Curio, while Velkhana creates the icy crystals and then they both rush at each other. And what's cool is that during the second clash, you can see Malzeno use his tail claw to catch Velkhana's, and then of course the laser blast. This feels like what Kushala vs Teostra should have been. It's much faster, flashier, they're both using their own abilities, it's great. Squad Magnamalo vs Velkhana is amazing for all the same reasons. Velkhana once again actually gets to stab someone in a turf war, which she didn't get to do at all in Iceborne, and I love how Magnamalo catches the tail on the third stab before swinging her around and giving chase. Velkhana's dodging is so well animated, and she actually gets to freeze something. It's really nicely done, another S tier. Now Primordial Malzeno vs Velkhana, this one is... people love it, I know people love it. I like this one a bit less because the first half feels a bit stiff for both fighters. The second half is great where, Primordial has his shield up and then sort of moves towards Velkhana with a triple combo. I feel like the others are just better. But I do appreciate how they only made this turf war because there's a chance that they could encounter each other before Primordial gets infected. I think I'll put this in A tier. Very high A tier, but A. And finally, this is not technically a turf war, but I think you have to include it anyway. Amatsu vs Apex Zinogre. S tier. Like, come on. How often do you get to see such a huge opponent fight someone a lot smaller, and the way the environment is incorporated into the whole thing, and I love how Amatsu double taps Apex to make him Wyvern rideable. It's really good gameplay story integration. Now it's time for the Great Realignment. Since we've placed all the turf wars down on the tier list, let's actually evaluate each tier and, see if they belong where they are. For F tier, I think they all belong here. Is Magnamalo vs Teostra really worse than the others? I want to say no because fundamentally it is still Magnamalo being cool, but in terms of what the outcome is, and how it's still mostly recycled, I do think it belongs here. And I think it's funny to have Astalos vs Magnamalo so high, whereas this recycled one is so low. E tier is good too. I'm debating moving the Gormagala vs Regios turf war up, but it is still disappointing. But at the same time, those Iceborne Elder Dragon ones aren't great either. And between you and me, I do think I've been a bit too harsh towards Iceborne lately. Okay, D tier. Zinogre vs Brachydios belongs here, but I'm starting to wonder if C tier is a bit too crowded. D tier is for turf wars that are simply okay, and C tier is for turf wars that are at least good, but maybe we could migrate some down. If that's the case, then I think I'll draw the line at Zinogre vs Rathalos. Everything below that gets migrated down to D tier. And I think we can also rearrange some of the turf wars in C tier. Anjanath vs Jagras could drop a few, I think. It is a very funny turf war, but I don't think it's better than the others. On the other hand, the Rathalos vs Iceborne monster turf wars, those four grouped together, I think they could go up a bit. I think we could put them right below Barrioth vs Bambaro. Now for B and C tier. For B tier turf wars, I don't think anything needs to be downgraded because Odogaron vs Titsiaku does belong there, but maybe it could be rearranged. But I think the only thing I would really do here is swap Espinas vs Kushala with Lunagaron vs Garangom. I think that turf war is just a bit better. Then we go to A tier. I'm going to make this one a little bit less crowded and also rearrange some. The Legiana Paulumu and Odogaron Radoban turf wars, they can go down to B tier. In fact, I will put them below Malzeno vs Lunagaron. However, I think I'll promote Rajang vs Kirin, and I'll put it right below Zinogre vs Mizitsune. But speaking of, I'll put Zinogre vs Mizitsune up next to Astalos vs Mizitsune. And I think Odogaron vs Paulumu will go right below Rajang vs Ruina. For S tier, I believe everyone belongs here. I wouldn't really move anyone down. And I don't think I would really rearrange anything either. But S tier should not be this crowded in my opinion, so what I'll do is I'll make a tier above that, S+, and we'll put Malzeno vs Velkhana as number 1, Velkhana vs Scorned as number 2, and Malzeno vs Scorned as number 3. So that's the tier list. You can kind of tell that over time, they got really good at designing turf wars. Iceborne had a few hiccups because they were stretched so thin, and Sunbreak had some really good ones by focusing on creating only a few. Regardless, I'm confident that Wilds will give us some great new ones. Maybe we will revisit the tier list a year from now. The template for this tier list was created by me, and is linked in the description. Feel free to make your own. The Fanatical bundles from earlier are also there too, do not forget. Remember to like and subscribe, and have a good day.